Welcome to Martial Wisdom. Here you can listen to conversations on all kinds of topics related to martial arts. The topic for today's show is, how do you handle a really fast opponent? Joining me in this discussion is Stephen Scott. Before we get started, please consider supporting this podcast by liking and sharing it. If you're interested in even more content, please consider subscribing to the Spirit Aikido online program. I'm proud to announce that the program currently has over 260 videos. Another option is to contribute any amount you like through the PayPal tip jar. Even small contributions are greatly appreciated. I hope you enjoy this episode. Now, on with the discussion. Welcome back to Modern Aikidoist podcast and Martial Wisdom. And I'm thrilled once again to have my friend Stephen Scott come back to the show. And we got a great discussion today. We're going to talk about how to deal with speed, somebody who's faster than you are. And we're going to talk about it with some practical ideas for the best way to handle either somebody you know is faster than you are or somebody that you aren't sure, but you've got to be careful not to get caught by their speed. So welcome back, Stephen.
Yeah, hi, Tristan. Thanks for having me.
You bet. I hope you enjoy being had.
Ask me at the end.
Yeah, exactly. So the topic of speed, I think, is something that every martial artist, every fighter faces. And, you know, we see Bruce Lee movies where he was so blazingly fast, and we hear about how he admitted he had to slow down so that what he was doing could even be seen by people watching the film. And speed is so seductive. We think, man, if we're just faster than anything, then we can, you know, we're gonna prevail. We're gonna succeed. Well, the reality is we can't all be Bruce Lee fast. And the other reality is that there is always going to be somebody faster out there than you are, despite how much you train. And there are people that are, those of us that are limited by, you know, one of those factors of speed, whether it's physical execution speed or the perception of your eye speed or your decision speed. All of these things can ding you if you're lacking one of those characteristics to make you a little slower. And we age. So as we age, we will get a little slower. And as you age, I think it becomes more important to think about how do you beat that speed, or how do you account for it so that you're not just at the whim of somebody who's fast. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I remember an old adage from my karate instructor way back in the day when I was a very young man. And what he used to tell me is, it's not always the best fighter or the fastest fighter that will win a competition or a bout or a situation. Very often it's the one who is the smartest. It's the one who can use their proper attitude, their proper mindset to control the situation round about them. And that's one of the things that I like to bring forth for all of my students, is that if you find yourself in an encounter, unless you have seen them before, it's not like when you're training. If I were to go and train for a boxing match, I'd be checking out who I'm fighting. I would know months in advance. I could check out the form. I could look at how they train. You know, it's all there. I would find people who've trained with them before, fought them before, get some information on them. What's their fast point? What's their weak point? We don't have that luxury when we suddenly find ourselves out of our norm and into an engagement, either in a competitive sense, you know, in an open martial arts tournament, or in a direct sense within any kind of self-defense aspect. So in those cases, that's where it's not necessarily the fastest one who's going to prevail there. It's who's able to control their own situation better and who's able to identify the threat process. And for me, that's one of the key fundamental aspects of, if you ever find yourself faced with a faster opponent, it's a little bit of a dichotomy, because the only way you're going to find out if they're faster is when they react. And by the time they react, you're in that situation. So if you immediately find that they're faster than you without any provocation, then one of two things are going to happen. You're either going to survive that first moment of contact, or you're not. Okay. And that's essentially how it's going to come down. If you manage to get through that first moment of contact, then that's where you, in all your trying to control all your animal brain, monkey and lizard brain responses to get out of there or puff yourself up or do whatever, you have to maintain that sense of self-control, and you have to try and engage with yourself and know what your limitations are and try and identify how you can achieve a strategic advantage over the individual that you're currently facing based on the limited information that you have in that first moment of encounter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you covered kind of one of the two areas I really wanted to talk about within the show, and there's kind of the sport realm, like you said, where you've got an opponent, you know he's quicker, you've studied him, you've seen him before, or you have an estimation, some summary of kind of what you're dealing with, and now you have to form a plan for how to deal with it. And then what you just covered was more the self-defense angle, where you don't have the benefit of intelligence. You haven't done any recon. You don't know necessarily what you run into, although there are ways that you can, indicators you can watch for that will tell you how quick somebody might be. And I like looking at things like, how do they take their steps? Do they kind of lumber, or do they have kind of somewhat quick feet? And hand speed is another one that is you want to find indications for. And this one can be very deceptive, because you see usually somebody who's very big in the body and they kind of move slow, and you think, oh yeah, they're going to be slow. They can have incredibly fast hands because, they're strong. A big person, always remember that they work out just by moving around. They're moving so much weight around that their muscles are getting more conditioning than somebody who's really lean or thin. And because we often think of, middleweight, featherweight, lightweight people being really quick. And generally they are. They tend to have a very high strength to weight ratio, which makes them quicker than usual. But they will also kind of give it away with their body language by being kind of twitchy or kind of quick to move their shoulders or their hips or take steps. And you can kind of get a very quick profile, which is usually pretty close. Just in estimating, watching how somebody moves, but the hands can be different than how the body moves. And that, I got that from, a friend who learned the hard way of, you look at a big guy and think, oh yeah, he's going to be slow. And then you wake up. He said, I woke up and realized he was quicker than I thought. Just like you said,
yeah.
You get the test of speed, and you may survive it or you may not. In his case, got the drop on him, one shot, and that was enough to end his ability to keep going. And that I think is one of those self-defense realm areas that's so different from sport. And I know we've had tons of discussions about this, not necessarily you and I, but on the forum and between martial artists for years, about what is different between sport fighting and street fighting or real, self-defense type realm martial art violence. And the big one is there's no referee to say, go. Now you're in some kind of a verbal altercation. Somebody's eyed you up, they've approached you, and there's a million different ways this can happen, whether it's a predator that is approaching you to, steal from you, and he doesn't mind knocking you out to take your wallet, up to somebody that's, got a problem with you personally, and they're gonna come after you. And I think that there are some certain principles that apply to the sport that apply to the real world one. And one of my favorites is, make somebody take the long way to get to you. You do your opponent or attacker a favor when you let them walk right up into their range. They're facing you head on, and your brain says, well, we're in conversation mode right now. We're gonna verbally exchange. Well, in your mind, that's what's happening, but in their mind, they have walked up directly. They know that they're in their own range, so they can ambush you. And they also know that if you don't take some kind of a step, whether it's raise your hands or some combination of move, get a little bit better range, move away from them, move to a side. If you don't move anywhere, they know that you cannot cover that reaction gap fast enough, and they're going to land one on you. And they don't even have to be Bruce Lee fast to do that. Like an average person can be quick enough to smack you quick before you can get your hands up from hanging down at your sides.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the things that I advocate. One of the things I advocate when I'm teaching my students, and one of the things that was pointed out to me that I wasn't aware that I did, was that whenever I'm out, my eyes are roving. It was one of my students told me, he approached me in the street one day with his wife, And then they walked on, and she said, have you seen his eyes? They're always moving around the entire area. They're looking at everything. And it was only after he told me that I realised, yeah, it's true. I don't live in a paranoid state of being, but I'm continually threat assessing my entire environment.
Pays to be careful.
Absolutely. And it's not staring at people down. It's just looking and trying to assess, as you said, how someone's moving, how their body is, what their behaviorisms are. Are they looking at me? Are they looking away? Are they watching my reflection in a window? You know, it's all little things like that. And that's something that we build through training and through our own personal development, martial development. And we achieve that by, you know, sincere, dedicated training in the dojo and looking at how we interact with the exterior world. So even in competition, when I used to do karate competitions, you didn't just sit and read a book or watch the kata or, you know, look at the other area to see what was going on. Anyone with any sense would sit and watch the people roughly of their own age and grade, because there's a high probability that's the ones that you were going to be going up against. And that's the same thing. You walk into the room, you threat assess the room. And I find even still when I go out, if I'm going out somewhere with my wife or if I'm going out just in general, the first thing I do when I walk into a room is take an assessment of it. You know, where's the door I've came in? Where's the nearest door? Where's the nearest cover? And I find I do it subconsciously. And as I say, it's not a paranoia thing. It's the backup plan. It's if something goes down in here, what can I do to find a safe space? And if that involves putting tables or a booth or, you know, dare I say it, another person in between me and someone trying to have a direct face-to-face confrontation with me, particularly if they're in a group, then so be it. That's what happens. And this is all little micromanaged things that happen in the back of my mind. And I think most martial artists will do this to some extent. I think it just goes with the territory, is that you train long enough that your mind wants to continually be in a state of readiness. Otherwise, there's no point training the way you train if you're not in a state of readiness. Almost a state of, you know, if we can use that Zanshin term, you know, just that mental awareness, that
That's
clarity.
Exactly what I was thinking when you mentioned that.
And, you know, it's not the mystical Zanshin where someone comes up to tap you in the shoulder and you turn around and scare your friend. It's just about having, in fact, I can go into a little anecdote about that. I can go into, it's about having that general sense of awareness. And particularly, I left training one day and I was walking to the bus stop to get the bus to get back to my house. And someone grabbed me from behind. Not harsh, but now I think about it, it was actually quite gentle. And they said something in my ear, but I didn't hear it. I just automatically went into beast mode and threw them over, took them down to the ground, almost knocked him out. Then I realised it was one of my colleagues from the class that hadn't been there that day. He was coming in to see everyone at the end of class, but we finished early. Then he saw me, thought he'd come up and have a little bit of fun. And unfortunately, it backfired on him. He nearly got knocked out in the middle of the street after getting thrown over my shoulder. And I'm not quite sure how I look at that, as in, should I have been more mentally aware that he was there? Should I have scanned the area more before walking out of the area that I was in into the larger, wider mall? Or should I be pleased with the way it turned out and that what I did worked? Even though the fact that a part of me thinks I should have perhaps recognized, you know, the threat recognition. And again, it takes me back to, I can remember lots of teachings from my old karate instructor, you know, always telling you to look before you block and things like that, or look before you punch, just in case it's your mum or your dad who's touched your shoulder and you turn around and belt them in the middle of the street. You know, always be aware of that. So I believe as martial artists, we have this constant sense of awareness, and that can become a hyper-awareness, even if we don't plan it to be so. And we're always looking for those, it's not escape measures, it's not get outs from places, but it's just how we can use the terrain and advantage to our advantage should anything happen. And that's also the same for class training. And I'm sure there's many people who will understand this. It doesn't happen so much in Aikido, where most people usually just pick out a training companion. But back in the days when we used to train, you had two lines. You would line up in two rows opposite each other, and that would be your partner. then one would move to the left, one would move to the right. So the second partner you were going to get, the second one along was always the next partner you were going to get. Mm-hmm. So if you could see the psychopath 6 down, you would grab the white belt beside you and swap places with him so that you didn't get the psycho, but he did. You know, because by the time you get to your third fight, that's who you're sparring with. And, you know, situational awareness, taking advantage of the room, making things work for you, you know, little bits like that. And even that's the kind of forward planning of how you would beat the guy with fast hands, you know, but in order to do that, you have to recognize the guy with fast hands in the dojo sense. So I always find that sometimes a little bit of smarts is the best way forward when it comes to that. And a little bit of situational awareness, being aware of what you can do within the scope of where you are. You know, not letting people get into that 3 foot, 4 foot threat range. If you can help,
you know, and that's one thing too that I've definitely felt, which is, and I'm sure every dojo is like this, where they teach about ma'ai, where you keep your attacker just outside of their range, where you make them take a step to you, and it's built on a solid fundamental. If you can, if they can have to take a step is a fairly slow motion compared to like a quick eye flick or something like that. And you can see it. You can usually see somebody take a step towards you. And that's the indicator that they're crossing that range. And if somebody can take that lesson and apply it in the real world, well, that's fantastic. But how often are we in a crowd where we have people that are within that bubble, where we just trust that they're going to walk by us without us, you know, keeping an arm's length away from them? You know, that's where reality, and I think that the lesson of taking what you're doing in the dojo and doing it in real life, at least trying to have your mindset of, okay, in the dojo, we're dealing with physical attacks, but once you leave, your mind stays, you know, stays, and it doesn't, you don't take what you learn on the mat with you into everyday life. For those people that do, I think it's exactly like you describe it. They start to learn, well, you know, okay, I had somebody in the dojo, I know how bad a choke is. So if somebody's behind me, I don't want them behind me, and they'll start sitting to their back with their back to the wall in restaurants, so that they can't be approached with, you know, from without seeing what's coming up behind them. They'll build those habits. A lot of police officers and law enforcement have that same habit. They'll do exactly what you're talking about. They'll look, okay, where are the doors? Where are the exits? They'll sit where they can watch the door, just so they can get the first look on somebody that comes in, because they want a profile. Like, does this look like a scumbag? Does this look like a violent drunk? Does this look like somebody looking to cause trouble? Or is it, you know, like it almost always is, just somebody there to go about their business, and they don't want to cause any trouble? But being the first one to spot the threat before the threat spots you, I think, is an important rule. And that is a testament to what you just said, of get a feel for the room, and you know, don't let somebody who's a troublemaker eye you up before you get a chance to see them. And then I think it's, you know, keeping your back to the wall is making somebody take the long way to get to you. If they decide to target you, you can see them approach before their speed becomes a real problem. Because once they're on top of you, and you can imagine, for example, sitting on a bench waiting for a bus, and you know, maybe some street person or somebody who wants to shake you down walks up and sits on the park bench right next to you. Well, now that perfect ma'ai bubble has been burst. Somebody is inside of it, and maybe they didn't sit next to you. Maybe they're standing in front of you, and now you're seated, they're standing. You know, which once somebody has a height advantage on you, that's an attempt to intimidate, or can be an attempt to intimidate, especially if they close distance and are standing like uncomfortably close. And I've gotten the word from people that deal with folks like this, is they use these things to make people feel uncomfortable. And when they feel uncomfortable, they say, okay, well, here, let me give you $5 to get out of my face, because I don't want to be uncomfortable like this. Like, it's a tool to get some money out of you. And, you know, in my opinion, the best way to stave intimidation is to, you know, face and realize, well, what could happen here, and can I handle this? And, you know, that might be when somebody approaches you, you stop sitting, you stand up, so you're more capable. Like, get in a position where you can move. You have some options. The positions that you're in that you have no options, and then when somebody approaches you, They choose the angle, they choose the distance. All those are choices made by somebody else, not you. And that's where I think you can kind of get started to paint it into a corner. And this can be whether you're seated or whether you're standing in a place that you can't really get out of and somebody corners you. And I'm sure everybody's had that, the yakamaniac person that kind of starts talking and they corner you and you physically can't get out without moving them because they just want to tell you about their entire, day or whatever. And they take that opportunity. I think the same principle goes for somebody that wants to, maybe use their speed or maybe use positioning to make you feel helpless. And now they use that as leverage to get what they want.
And one of the interesting things about that, and I can speak from experience, having done plenty of competitions in my youth, is when you're in for example, an 8x8 meter square fighting in a competition sense. Let's keep this on a well. I'll move this on to competition level. I'm not the fastest moving my body. Okay, I've always been quite heavy set, kind of a hairy square, more than a perfect I-shaped, Y-shaped physique. And but I've, just like you were saying, I've got incredibly fast hands, incredibly fast hands, incredibly slow legs, incredibly fast hands. And when I used to spar, when I used to compete, it was very easy for people to attempt to maneuver me. But what I found I had to do was, it was to take a stand ground position and not quite circle, but L-shape my movements. So I didn't move in a circle. I would move forward and to the side in an L shape, kind of like a knight on a chessboard, forward and to the side, forward and to the side. Because by taking that forward and to the side motion, I'm moving toward but away at the same time, kind of like we do in Taino Henka style movement or Irimi Tenkan style movement.
Distance, but you start to take like a flank position more than a front on front.
Yeah, because when someone's moving fast, they want to attack you on their terms. They want to move in with their weight balanced and dispersed and then throw the strike. So by shortening that distance, you're forcing them to rethink their momentum motion. And then by moving sideways, you're forcing them not just into a vertical, but a horizontal plane change, which then means that I always found when I sparred like that, that they then had to bounce around me to get back into the position they wanted to be in. So they're burning calories while I'm conserving energy. And yes, it wasn't the nicest, most fanciest fight, but it got me through to plenty of finals. Unfortunately, I usually met some of the guys from my own club who knew this is what I was doing and proceeded to batter me up and down the mat. But that's usually how these things work. So, it was interesting to experience that because I was trying to command my movement to force them out of their comfort zone. And what they were trying to do was to force me into a corner. But by not allowing that cornering to happen, by trying to command my movement and my position, that took away one of their advantages, which was their fast feet.
Right.
Fast feet, fast movement. So even if a kick get thrown, I would be moving either into the kick or away from the kick, which meant it didn't have full impact. And it also gave me a time to, when moving in proper stance and proper guard, it meant that the point of impact that their mind had set up has actually changed. So half the time, even a kick, if it connected with me in a competition sense, wasn't a proper enough technique to be granted a score or a point. But it then gave me something to grab and hold on to, which then allowed me to... This
brings up, I think, two really solid fundamentals. And the first one being a moving target is harder to hit. And it doesn't say you have to be a fast moving target, just that you're moving. And I mean, I'm not talking like molasses slow, that's easier to hit. But if you're moving around and adjusting, it makes somebody who's quick have to readjust as they're targeting computers, trying to figure out how to land a shot on a moving target, especially when
it only takes
unpredictably.
It's just a couple of degrees. That's all you need.
Right.
A couple of degrees. And as I say, I wasn't lumbering about, Frankenstein's monster. I was on my toes. I was still quite light, but I was able to move and adjust speed. Not as fast as my opponent, but that's how I always broke down the faster moving opponents, because they want to get in fast, get out fast, get you before they get them, particularly ones with the legs, fast moving legs, because they perceive the longer reach as a benefit. which it is, but they're wanting me to stop moving so they can make that target.
And that's the thing. Every fighter, regardless of whether it's self-defense or in a sport ring, wants the gift of having their opponent stop for a second and pause and just stay in that place. That lets the targeting computer lock in and fire the missile without having to readjust range, footwork, and angle. And so that is something to keep in mind. Even if you're talking with somebody approaches you, you can move around a little bit, shift your feet, change your position. Don't let them eye you up like a statue that's in a static position, and they get to choose where they move to have their better angle. And you can do this subtly. You don't have to look like a fighter or like Muhammad Ali, bouncing around it to create those angles. The angles are still there. It's how you get to them. And you can subtly, do that. You can look like a slightly fidgety person, that wants to look around and do so, change your feet position, things like that. And in doing so, you can control your angle to your opponent. And one of the fundamentals I love teaching all of my people is that if you are standing right in front of somebody, you're in the most dangerous piece of real estate you can be. Like, they have all of their weapons and they can fully see you when you're standing right in front of them. It's harder when you're beside them. They have to turn to look at you. The best place is behind them where they cannot see you. But the farther you go around, the better your position gets. It's safer. They have to turn and they have to take the long way to get to you, not the quick way. And these things can be practiced, on a day-to-day conversational kind of sense without even letting anybody know you're doing it. And one of the other things that is very helpful is that your sense of touch is, and I'm sure you know this, but it's for everybody listening, is so much more sensitive to movement than your eye is. So if you move to the side and I set my hand on your arm, like, hey, how you doing? What can I do for you? I can feel your body. If you tense up a little bit or you start to move, like, that sends a super strong signal. And my eyes don't need to watch your hand. If you reach like to try to get something out of your belt, like a knife or into a pocket,
you can feel
I can feel that. I mean, it's like a neon sign lights up.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And bouncers use that all the time for an escort, because they know they can feel right away if somebody gets tense and they want to try to pounce. And the second point I wanted to bring up too was, and this covers back to the sport realm, which is quick fighters have the advantage of quickness or speed, but they also have the disadvantage that it takes a lot of energy to be quick all the time. And if you make them constantly adjust and they adjust quickly and explosively, that's pretty taxing. Now, the downside is that light, wry people tend to have a lot of, they're thinner because they don't have a lot of muscle bulk. They tend to not gas out as quickly. You make somebody who's big move around a lot, and there's so much blood running through all of that muscle, the heart's got to pump it, they will exhaust faster. So I think like what you found is you move deliberately. You don't have to try to be explosive or quick, but by constantly moving, you can make somebody who's jumpy burn a lot of energy up trying to always readjust their range and change angles and use their quickness. And you kind of use their quickness against them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Least, again, from a sports standpoint.
And yeah, it's one of, again, you'll hear me say this a lot. One of the things I like to point out to people is that just because someone can move in and strike fast doesn't mean that they can retreat and defend fast. A fast attacker is not necessarily a fast defender. And in fact, some people move faster than they can think. And that's a real danger, because they have one focused attack, one focused thought. And that doesn't mean that they can then adjust fast to a changing situation. And that becomes very, very important, particularly when to deal with the question, how do you deal with someone with fast hands? You make them think faster than their hands go. So you constantly have to get them to adjust their thought process so that their brain is moving faster than their ability to control.
Yeah, you provide them strikes. Too much input that they have to process. Yeah, that
they have to keep trying to process and change and adapt. And when I teach things like distance and spacing and mat-ai, things like that, those types of concepts, I always tell my students to imagine there's an isosceles triangle coming out from your chest that's pointing through your center line. If you can enable that through your opponent's center line while seeing their triangle off at an angle, then you have adjusted enough that they're offside. The side that would produce a hook, for example, now has maybe an extra inch or two to travel. Now, that doesn't sound like much. If we're talking about a fast punch, we're only talking about maybe a tenth, eighth of a second
it's
extra
a game
time.
of centimeters, really.
But it makes the difference in both forcing them to adjust their range and then giving you the chance, that extra couple of millimeters just to get a hand up to deflect. It's all buying you time. And that's the most important thing. And in a street sense, time becomes one of the most important factors. Because if someone's going to attempt to put you down fast, time is your ally. Because the longer that goes on, the more likelihood there is. Obviously, if it's a group of 8 guys coming at you, you know, time is not your ally. You know, but if you're looking to try and break up or avoid the fight or get away from it, or as you say, the solo guy comes up, starts hovering over you, decides to make you uncomfortable, puts in a threatening presence, the longer that extends, the greater probability there is that someone else is going to be there, someone's going to see something, someone else may choose to act on your behalf as well. So time starts to become a factor for you, because anyone who comes to you wanting to either assault or rob you or whatever, they want it over fast. Nobody wants this to be prolonged, particularly people who want your money. They want your money, give me your money, or, you know, just give me your money. They don't want to be standing there for 3 minutes debating how much money, whether they want it in small change or large change, you know, whether they'll take a check. They don't want to debate all that. They just want in and out fast, because they know themselves that in the act of committing an illegal action, whether it's an assault or a robbery, that the longer this goes on, the greater the probability is that something's going to go against them. And that stands to reason for everything. It's the same when you're sparring. It's the same when you're in competition. It's the same when we're training in the dojo. Is if we're doing line work where you've got one attacking you after another, you know, like a good Bruce Lee movie, one person attacks after another after another. I always try to throw a little spanner in the works by saying to someone, I'll pick a random person in line and just tell them, don't try and hit them with a basic strike, try and tackle them, because that's going to hold them up for 3 seconds.
Right.
And and I'll say to the guy behind him, if you see him getting held up, start coming in, you know, and then I'll say to the one behind him, okay, just keep piling it on. And it's not there to trick people, it's just there to give them a sense of fresh perspective that, you know, when you're being attacked in the dojo and in this concept of what we're training in, time becomes the greatest factor here. So they have to take the person who first started to slow time down for them and use them to their advantage, either by trying to apply something like Sankyo or Ikkyo, keeping everybody else away, slowing down the attacking process, basically creating a blockage and a pile up of bodies behind them as best they can, because eventually somebody's going to get through. So that's when we've moved on from, in the dojo, when we do that type of training, we've moved on from simply trying to be faster than everyone else into trying to be smarter, mentally faster than everyone else in the room, because you can't outfight 8 people, but you can outthink the majority of them and create an opening for yourself.
Yeah, that's true. You know, and the way you described that, you know, what leapt to my mind was also providing a structure that they have to go around. And, you know, this is where I like Jeff Thompson's, fence principle, where your arms are up. Even if you just have your arms kind of up, or you're, you know, scratching your head, even doing something innocuous like this gives yourself some kind of obstacle they have to go around to get your head. Like the pathways to your head are limited, and you can do it just by looking casual. There's a bunch of different ways to do it. You know, the Jack Benny thing where you're covering your neck and the mark, and you use that with positioning your movement, and you start to know. And this is why to me it's so important to know the strikes and punches that people use in real life, because then you start to understand the angles and the paths that those things use and how to mitigate those and not allow the easy, fast stuff to get to you. It has to take a big, wide arc to get around whatever it is you put up in front of you. And then it takes some practice to make it not look like you're, you know, in martial arts stances. You kind of hide it with some, you know.
You can be subtle.
Yeah, exactly.
You can be subtle about it.
The principle's still there. You know, you don't give them that short path to you.
Yeah, I remember a guy I used to train with doing some boxing, and he passed on a few words of wisdom from his old coach, which was that the reason you see a lot of boxers with their gloves here is because it covers the area they want it to cover. He said, because you can tone your lower half in the ring you can condition that. He says, you can't condition bone. Right. So if we take a hit to the head, there's no amount of conditioning is going to help you out. You can't sit and smash your head off walls in the vain hope that it's going to make you take a punch. It's going to make you take a punch better. But you can drop medicine balls onto people and stuff like that and help them condition and get used to taking impact. You can't do that with your head. As a testament
to that, I don't know, have you ever heard of Henry Rollins told the story about when he was in high school and he was pretty weak, thin kid. And, his science teacher befriended him and kind of became like a father figure to him. And, he said, hey, can you teach me how to lift weights? And I want to kind of toughen up. And, of course, this was back in the day, as he would have been thrown in jail for this, now. But he said, all right, I'll show you how to lift the iron and we're going to condition you up. And one of the things he did as he walked by Rollins, he just punched him right in the gut. And he said, the first time, I got folded up. I laid on the ground. Like, oh my God. But he said he would just every once in a while, unbeknownst to him, he'd walk up and just hit him right in the stomach. And he said, it didn't take more than, a month or two. And he'd hit me and I'd, look at him and I'd walk. You just get used to that being hit. Now, there are, I think, exceptions. There's no way you can, condition yourself against a liver knockout. There's no way that you're going to condition the mark not to start to knock the wind out of you if you get nailed right in that right spot. But it's not like you got a glass torso where anywhere you get hit, you're gonna fold up on the ground. So you're right, it can be conditioned that way. And one word of warning, and I've seen a lot of martial artists do this, they'll keep their hands up here.
Yeah.
If you punch the hand and get punched with your own fist, it won't help you.
No, it doesn't.
In fact, it just makes it easier because your opponent can hit your hand from farther away. You've given them that much extra distance that they can be away from you and still hit you with your own fist.
Yeah.
So it's very much a glove specific
oh yeah, completely.
guard.
And you've got to remember the gloves themselves are the guard. They're big, thick gloves. 16-ounce gloves are big. They make your hands quite chunky. So it's that's part of your guard. And
so if you're doing that, just realize don't you take on a guard that's more of a pugilism guard, because that's what it was meant for, is bare knuckle.
That's exactly what it's for. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And
that's the tool it was built for.
I've seen people in courses do that where they brought their hands up and then someone kicked it and it went back.
Right. Why are you hitting yourself?
Yeah, it's crazy. And but yeah, one of the things that we do develop, although you can't condition your head, what we do develop is a tolerance to the pain or the shock.
Right.
And that's another thing. You get used to that so that it doesn't override and overwhelm your senses. And that's one of the things that when you train in a competitive manner, or whether you train it in a kind of dedicated fashion within whatever your respective dojo is, that's why I always feel that the soft aspect of technique is there. It's great for development, for technical skills and that kind of thing, but you still need to practice a harder development so that if in the event that you are in a position where you have to use your skills, if you are going to take a strike, if you do take a strike, if you trip, you fall, you land on your back, you're not automatically panicked and that the wind goes out you, the fight goes out you, the shock gets to you. And I've ever since I was born, I've had slightly reduced visibility in my left eye, and the amount of kicks to the head I used to take in that side was amazing. And I remember in the early days of competition, the first one, that almost took me out of the game. I just wasn't prepared for it from someone who was, because when you're training in the dojo, nobody's trying to hurt you. When you're training in competition, nobody's trying to hurt you. But if they can take you out with a good hit, they would have done that. It was the 80s. So, people, yes, we were padded, but come on, it was like 5mm thick padding. It was useless. The first hit you ever took to the head, you remembered it. And I remember a couple of competitions on, going out in the first round, hurting, sore, feeling a bit sorry for myself. But a couple of couple of years later when I was competing, I've seen me competing with half an eye closed and lumps on my head that had the stitching of the old fabric mitts in them, and I'm still fighting on. You know, something, and it's not because I was a hard man or anything like that. I was a big tough guy. It's just because you get used to the impact, you get used to the shock, you know, and that's a big thing that it's important. When people ask about realism, how they can train realistically, again, I like to say to them, ask your opponent to put in proper throws, ask your opponent to put in proper threat for you. It's not about techniques that work on the street, it's how you cope with the situation that arises. Because you are going to get
training almost is getting used to not being mentally.
It's like a response training. Yes, I don't allow yourself to become mentally compromised when you take a strike. You know, if it knocks you out cold, that's completely different. There's not a damn thing you can do about that. You know, if you're caught unawares, under the jaw, boom, down you go. Nothing you can do about that. There's no amount of training can prepare you for that. But as opposed to someone coming up and putting a glancing blow in, instead of running away holding your face, you know, a seasoned martial artist who's used to taking the knocks, you've just got to look at the guys in MMA to see it happening. You know, they take a severe amount of punishment, but they don't stop. You know, they still try to do what they're there to do. They're trying to get the job done. It's the same with boxers. That's how they can take all this. And yes, it's pretty brutal, but it does serve a purpose, and that purpose is it prepares you to take that initial impact, that initial shock. And if we all think back in an Aikido sense to when we took our first over-the-top kotegai fall, and you landed all wrong, and you landed half on your front, you probably punched your teeth, your legs came together in that horrible way that makes you feel sick for hours. And you know, your knee probably collided off the back of your head somehow, and you don't know how it happened, and you just want to die in that moment because you just feel terrible. You know, compared to how
you got run over by a truck.
Oh yeah. Compared to how, as a senior grade, you can take the impact, and also the shock on the wrist. You learn to live with the shock on the wrist and the shock of the impact on the floor and the conditioning that gives you. That's all really important stuff, because it's one of the things that people don't realize about Aikido is, okay, do take a tremendous amount of punishment. A lot of it looks staged, a lot of it looks fake, but every time you hit the floor, you're basically asking gravity not to smash you with the planet, and you're trying to roll with it and get back up. And that puts a lot of impact and emphasis on the body, whether it's core strengthening, tension, you know, learning to maneuver your body safely, controlling your body during flight and momentum to strike the ground in a safer way. It requires a certain amount of acrobatics and contortionism at the same time, you know, trying to save yourself from that, which is really, really important. And these are all part of the Aikido conditioning that is often missed. So it's,
and I'm glad you brought that up, because this is something I think that is a topic not really mentioned much. And that is, you know, within most Aikido training, we all acknowledge that we want to protect our ukes. We don't want to bust people up. And that's a good way to make your training sustainable. But oftentimes we can blunt it so much that just a light throw can chuck an uke into their kemi. And in my opinion, as a nage, really what you want to do is find where that edge, how can you bring your uke down just to the point, if you went any farther, their fall would be horrific, even with good ukemi skills. And then you get to that edge and let them go, but you're in full control all the way from the beginning, first contact, kazushi, that taisabaki, you get their body, you set up your throw or technique or whatever it is, you get to that point where now you got full control, and that's where you draw your line. But you're so familiar with that you know, if I went just a little farther, this is going to be really, and that can be how much pressure you put on the Niki. It can be, you know, how dramatic your Tenchinage throw is, or your Shio-nage. You know, perfect example of that is you have to have mercy for Shio-nage. If you get that and you go past that line, your uke is going to be feeling it. So, but not to go so light that you just suffice with, I'm going to get kazushi and I can kind of set up my waza, and then I'll just kind of let somebody float away. You know, that's where I think that good edge really needs to be explored.
Yeah, that takes us into another part of this discussion where, again, if I can
actually, let me jump in with one quick thing that from just a moment ago before we jump on, and that is, you talked about taking the shock. And there are many instances of self-defense situations where people get stabbed maybe once or repeatedly with a knife, and they keep going. It's not like in the movies where somebody gets stabbed and it's like, you know, they stabbed a tire on a car and it just goes flat, where the person just collapses down and they do their dramatic last words and then they, you know, out they go. We see these things, and our subconscious mind has a difficult time discerning reality from fantasy, because our eyes see it. And that's nobody's real fault. That's just how the human brain functions. And so when we see something that looks plausible on a movie screen or TV screen, we think, oh, that must be what it's like to be stabbed with a knife. Well, in reality, there are a few stabs that can take you out instantly, but not many. Chances are, and because people have survived getting shot multiple times or getting stabbed multiple times or both. I think Jim Bowie had an incident where he was shot and stabbed, and he was fighting a bigger guy and still killed him, but barely survived himself because he took so much damage. But these things can happen, and there's a factor of mental toughness, I think, but there's also adrenaline plays into that as well. Adrenaline is trying to get you past that shock and to keep you in a fight and keep you to going so that you have a chance of surviving. But if your mind gives up, the adrenaline really can't help you.
No, it'll stop. It just stops. It's very akin to
training is against that mind paralysis. It's to train that fighter's or warrior's mind.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's one of the most important things that we can do, because we don't know. No one knows how they're going to react in any given situation. The best we can hope to do is to control ourselves and control our reaction to whatever's happening round about us, and not to succumb as best we can. As you say, if you get hit with that one shot that, you know, say someone pulled a knife, went straight through, quite in the chest, pierced a ventricle, or, you know, cut a femoral artery, it's out, you're done. And there's nothing you can do about that. But when we train, we try to, firstly, as an Aikido club, we all do Tanto work. The first thing I tell people about Tanto work is it's nothing to do with using a knife. It's all about learning distance. It's all about understanding the awkwardness of what you can achieve if someone is holding something, and also to show them just how bloody dangerous it is, because we don't do the big, you know, I used to call it the Star Wars figure Tanto swing, you know, how the arm only moved in one direction. You know, it's just this big heave thing. We do short slashes, short stabs, pokes, all that kind of thing, just to prove to the fact that, you know, if you're in a situation and someone pulls a knife, you're going to get hurt, you're going to get cut. If you choose to pursue this line of continuance, you know, if someone pulls a knife and asks you for the wallet,
that's about the only thing.
That's it. The only thing, that's
not to get cut or stabbed.
Absolutely, get the hell out of there, because it's you're not going to win that. It's going to weigh you down, and all it takes is a cut across your knuckles, and you can't use your hand. All it takes is a cut across your arm, and you've, you know, just sever two tendons in your arm, and that's or one tendon in your arm, you're it's out. It's about bringing that reality in. When we do Tanto work, we split it into two factors. One is about the more technical aspect of maneuvering someone while keeping them at distance from you. And that's the lesson they're learning there. And the other one is just look how absolutely ridiculous this is. Don't think for 1 minute if someone pulls a knife on you that you're going to be safe. And that's the nights that we've not done it for years. You go in, get people to wear an old shirt, go in with a felt tip pen, and just go to town on people. You know, it's like the mark of Zorro, and everyone comes out with hundreds of cuts all over there. And, you know, if you've not got a cut across a pen mark across your nose or across your throat, you're doing really well. It just shows how dangerous that situation is. And it's to break that fallacy of, you know, you're doing a martial art, so if someone attacks you in the street and pulls a knife, you'll be safe. I'll show you how to be safe. That's absolute BS. Do you know what I mean? It's like, you know, doesn't happen.
Yeah, we could do probably a whole show on the snake oil peddlers that are out there selling the magic of, you know, you can, you know, this is what martial arts can do, and you can be safe from all kinds of weapons. And, you know, I mean, how many fast gun disarms have we seen? Not to say that you can't disarm somebody with a pistol. It is possible, but the way it's presented is such parlor trickery.
But every single one of them requires that Star Wars straight arm that doesn't bend, at extreme range. No one holds a pistol like that. No one with any way of training anyone's fired a pistol. You fire a pistol with a straight arm like that, you're going to break your thumb. Do you know what I mean? Just with a recoil. It's silly. So it's, yeah. And as you say, that's all the kind of snake oil stuff. It is, unfortunately, it's all there, and it's still there, and it's never going to go away. And it's very odd when you see that represented, because when we're talking about fast hands, when you also look at, if you look at any of the guys that do Kali work, that's fast hands with knives. That's super fast stuff. I've got great amount of respect.
Comment too, because what I've seen, and I love, I've got some great friends that are in the Kali Eskrima world. Between the Filipino martial arts and the Jeet Kune Do guys, they're like speed freaks. They're the And it's funny because whenever I've seen instructors come and teach at my friendship seminars or at other cross training type events, their hands move fast, they show everything fast, they talk fast. I mean, it's like they're running 2 times normal speed.
Way too much Monster Energy drink.
Yeah, it's just kind of funny. I mean, I don't condemn them for it. God bless them. But to me, that shows that total dedication to, we need to be faster, which is great if you've got the physical trait. But, what if you have a student that they're just not inherently fast? They don't have inherently fast hands or inherent quickness. Can you make your art fit them? Because it's a smart art, not just one that's built on raw speed, raw quickness. The same way that can you, would you say, when you look at an average wrestler, these guys are all ripped, they're big. Can you say, well, you can be a wrestler at 135 pounds? Well, if you learn the principles, yes, you can, but it doesn't necessarily mean you get against a 200-pound wrestler that you're going to prevail, because we know body size is a factor. And I would say speed is a factor too, but there are ways to mitigate both and try to use somebody's traits against them. And,
absolutely,
big, make them move around a lot, because again, that blood starts flowing, especially if there's a bit of fear in their system. And this affects, doesn't matter what body size or body type you are, when you start to get anxious and afraid and you start breathing shallow, you start getting your brain gets a little starved of oxygen. Your your heart's got to pump a lot of blood because it excites you. When you get excited, your adrenaline starts to dump a little bit. That is very exhausting. And if you know that's what's happening and you can stay calm, you can let that other person almost exhaust themselves just by standing there or just by adjusting their movement to you. I know a friend of mine that actually was playing with this pressure and tension, and he's a sport fighter, but he's at a very high level. And he got to the point where he just never let his opponent back out into that safe my range. Every time his opponent felt a little anxious, he'd back out and then he'd start to close in, and he never let him breathe. And he said after about 3 or 4 minutes, the guy just turned around and threw up. Like there was so much tension that was kept in his body that didn't allow to be released. He just sent his whole physiology into shock, pretty much. Granted, that's a sport type of a situation, but you have the same thing in a self-defense, in the fact that you have high level of emotion. Oftentimes there's fear. Adrenaline's probably going to be a factor, especially as somebody who's on a runaway, like they're enraged, or maybe even they've approached you to steal your wallet and they're afraid they're going to get caught. Their heart's pounding, their breath is short. Like these factors exist in both realms.
Yeah, they do. And it's possible for you to increase your own adrenaline state without losing the capability you get from that. For example, someone who's raging or someone who's hyperactive in terms of, as you just put, someone wants to approach you, steal something from you, and they're in a highly agitated state. While their adrenaline's flowing, when we train, we learn to channel that adrenaline surge, whether consciously or subconsciously. And I'm not getting into the mystical stuff here. I'm not saying that I sit in rooms raising my heart rate and lowering my heart rate, Like, and what was it, James Coburn, Flynn, and with Flynn and all that, he used to meditate and lower his heart rate, all those kind of James Bond spoofs. I'm not talking about that stuff. It's just pure and simply that we can choose to exert or expand our our focus in a controlled manner, and that becomes really, really important. And that ties me into that other thing that I was going to raise, is that, and you just touched on it there with your friend you were talking about, does the combative work, is that when you're faced with fast hands, the initial proper defense, then understanding that even fast hands have an optimum range.
Right.
They're only fast within, and this is why it's good to practice against, jabs, hooks, uppercuts, straight punches. Practice against everything in your practice. Don't stick to traditional showmen, yokomen. That's not going to help you at all. No one attacks you like that unless it's just a giant Star Wars figure that's going to, with only that one arm. No one attacks you like that. But you can get attacked with various different melee styles. Study a little bit, as you said, of pugilism. Study a little bit of things like Wing Chun, which is very close to pugilism. It forms the center line, the same V shape, the same hand positions almost. Have a look at these arts and understand them, because every single strike will have an optimum effect point. And as Aikidoka, what we excel at is moving our body. We don't move the target. We'll not pull the head back. We want to keep our body in a good, strong, stable position and move the target as the whole body. And that doesn't have to be fast. But by doing that, we then shut down the capability for that fast hands. Yes, they might be fast, but they're only fast within an optimum range. When we get in and shut that down, they've lost that optimum range. And you might take some digs to the ribs. You might take a couple of elbows to the ribs. That's still, and that's one thing to be aware of. Fast hands tend to come from fast hip movement, which also tends to allow the elbows to be brought in quite quickly as well. So you have to be aware of, once you get past hand range, you're into elbow range, you're into head range, and understanding where these threats can come from. And it's not rocket science. It's just understanding that if you're facing with a fast opponent who throws a flurry of punches at you, we also have threat assessment and optimal threat range. You can, and you see this in karate competitions, guys who have set motions, front punch, reverse punch, uraken, gyakuzuki, reverse punch, up for a high roundhouse kick, mawashigiri. And they do that same set of 6-7 movements every time. Bum, 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 bum. Sharp as the edge of a razor. So sharp. But if that's not within contact range, it's just a flurry of motion. The threat from it isn't there. So they will try and maneuver you back. What they want to do is hit you with the kick. The hands are just there to force you back and hope you're going to make a mistake. Try and capture your attention, and then it's the kick that's going to do the damage. It's the final part of it. And it's understanding that the flurry, the fast hands isn't necessarily the final outcome. The fast hands might just be the distraction for something else. So by closing that and shutting that down, not by preempting it, but by controlling your environment, and as you say, putting something between you and them, getting in close like your friend was doing when he was talking about sport work, getting in and shutting them down, it means that they've got to rapidly change tact.
And making them respond to you, not just
make them respond.
Free rein to line up their approach.
Yeah, don't be a heavy bag. Don't just stand there. Be able to move. In fact, some heavy bags even hit back. There's tons of fail videos on YouTube for guys doing things with the big bob bag, and it basically knocks them out when they're not looking. And that's how easy it is for fast hands to be broken. Fast attacks to be broken up. It just takes that one incident to capture it. And also, what we have to be aware of when we talk about the Zanshin and the Ma'ai is that one person coming at you who's throwing fast hands might be a distraction for the guy standing behind you.
Right.
So sometimes it's not just about him. Sometimes he's just the one making the noise, making the movement. Going into a boxing stance, throwing a couple of flurries, you try to engage with him and someone hits you over the back of the head with a 2-before. It can happen. And that's where you can't be locked in.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things that I think play into this is also the idea that, of course, if the timing you always approach is reactionary, you are very concerned about the guy with fast hands because you have to keep up with his speed. You have to recognize the attack, make the decision, execute, and actually get your hands or whatever response you're going to get in the time it takes him to do his one quick attack. Mm-hmm. To me, that shows the limitation of that go-no-sen timing, the reactive mm-hmm. approach. And I'm a big fan of the proactive, because one of the ways to deal with somebody who's fast hands is to take their base out from underneath them, get their body tipping and responding to being interfered with. And if you mm-hmm. make the first move, and I was taught the principle called Shodo Seizu, control the first move. I don't know if that's a widespread, like if all Aikidoists are exposed to that. I mm-hmm. think probably a lot are. But if you haven't, like, what stops you from making an intercepting movement before this speed freak unloads on you? Like, it's mm-hmm. a lot safer to take their posture quickly, and you can do so without having to hurt them before they launch that quick attack, because once their body's destabilized, they can be quick, but they will have no power. You can take their ability really to do harm to you away from them by mm-hmm. controlling their body.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's fundamental to the style of Aikido I do, Tristan, is that Irime is king. It doesn't matter what your opponent's doing, get in there, because if you don't, you can't control a combat by stepping back. And mm-hmm. good Aikido will only, yes, you can rotate, yes, you can circle, you mm-hmm. know, you can spin, but there's very little, I'm trying to think what they call it now. Is it tenshin? It's called, where you step back and control. You know, you get the big loping swing coming in, and people will step back from left posture into right posture, and they'll blend tenshin, tenkan and tenshin. I'm sure that's what they call it. But I don't advocate that at all, because, again, coming from a combat background, coming from a fighting background, from a different martial art, and from judo as well, let's not forget that, and also the gleamer that I do as well. As soon as you step back, they're just going to keep coming. And again, we used to do a little exercise in the class, particularly in the kids' class. The kids used to love this, where I'd line two kids up, and I do it with the adults. In fact, I might even do this on Friday night at the class. Have one facing forwards, have one facing backwards, and get them to run the length of the hall and see who wins. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the guy going backwards is not going to, they can move fast, but they can't look, they can't see where they're going, their body weight's off. But the person going forward doesn't even have to try. Of course, they're going to win, because you can move forwards faster than you can backwards. Mm-hmm. So this brings into the next part of how to deal with the fast hands, which is understanding the psychology of body movement and reaction. And we actually did an exercise on this in the class the other week, where I had one of my students and I told them to stand there and move when he felt threatened. So it was about 3-4 feet away, and I took a step in. I brought my hands up a little, held them at my chest. I dropped my knees a little, held them at my chest. I could see him getting uncomfortable. And then I just stared. I gave him the stare. Mm-hmm. And that's when he started to twitch. And I said to him, do you know what you reacted to? And one person behind him laughed. He went, oh, because he saw it. The wee fella that reacted, he didn't know why he reacted. He just knew he suddenly felt uncomfortable. He'd seen the intent in my eyes that I was about to weigh in on him. Mm-hmm. And he moved back, but he didn't know how he moved back. And the fellow behind him saw it, and he laughed because he could see the intent and saw how he reacted to it. And the people off to the side couldn't see it. So everyone was really confused as to why it took me all that walking in, an extra couple of steps, bringing my hands up, trying to kind of act a little bit threatening. But what did it was the eye movement, because at that point, on a primal level, he knew this is going to get real and he's going for me. And that's when he started to feel uncomfortable. And we can recognize that. And we touched on this earlier, that sense of intuitive response to threat. You know, you pick up a rock, you don't get this over here so much, but you pick up a rock, there's a snake under it. Your first instinct's to back off from it. You don't suddenly think, oh, that's a lovely snake, I'm going to grab that, you know, unless you're one of these crazy guys on the survival programs, you know, one of these mad ranger types. But the majority reaction is we recognize a threat. You know, it's the same when you see a flame. You know, if you see a fire, your natural instinct's not to go up and put your hand in it.
Right.
You know, you recognize it as a threat. With people, we recognize threat.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore we can react to that.
The best way I've heard it. You've struck on something. I love your description of it. And it's something that's always bothered me about how I see a lot of Aikidoists throw their atemis, where they look down or they look away and they kind of wave a hand up in somebody's face. Like, if you're going to sell that you are threatening their face, you have to have exactly that eye contact that you're talking about. You have to look like a threat. You have to look where that hand would be going if it was an actual strike. And you have to sell them on the fact that they're
absolutely,
like, if you're going to the eyes or the face, you're threatening their face. And you do that with the eyes and the look. That's what sells it. It's not the hand coming up.
No, it's not.
You show that intent. Yeah. And I think that you just described it perfectly. And that's what I thought of, because
anyone who's ever
so many times when some people wave their hand up and they expect Uke to respond, and like, no, you got to sell it, buddy. You got to sell that that's a real danger.
Yeah. You should, it's not particularly nice, but you can do this to someone. I had that on a course where you used to get the guy come in with a hand. And at one point, I just jumped in and slapped it and went, high five. But the noise, the impact, it went boom. And he walked away holding his hand like that under his arm. I felt my hand was stinging. It must have really hurt because I had my whole body weight behind it. And I saw it coming. I went, high five. And I just jumped up with this big squeaky voice. And it got a hell of a laugh. But boy, did that boy not ever try and attack me like that again. Yeah, it's that intent. If you've ever had someone angry with you who's thrown a punch, they don't look placid and
right.
And there's a focus, there's an anger. You know, they're right in your face, and you're getting, and they're right at you. And that's how I attack in the class. Now, everyone knows I'm not going to hurt them much. Everyone knows I don't. But the way we train as well is if you don't move, I'm going to hit you in the head. Mm-hmm. And it's just to teach that if you don't move, I'm going to connect. And it's not going to hurt, but it's going to smart. You
struck on the right formula. And I think this is a mistake that a lot of martial artists make when they get into the safe dojo realm. They drift away from making their attackers look as close to what a real attacker is going to look like. So you get used to it. It's not going to surprise you or shock you when it actually.
Yeah, that's the thing. And that's that shock. Again, that's the thing that puts you on your heels. That's what someone relies on, is you reacting to that aggression. So and unless you train to recognize and deal with that, you're never going to be prepared for it. You know, it's like, you know, again, over in the US, I know a lot of guys don't drive stick shift. There's a lot of automatics. Can you imagine learning in an automatic, then turning up for your test and it's a stick? It's shock, you know. Yep. it's the same principle.
All it takes is a momentary exposure to get that slight shock. In fact, you know, I had a test, mid-belt test. I think it was a Sankyu test just a couple of months ago, like a month or two ago, and I took the place of Uke for a portion of this test, and I turned on the heat. When I attacked, I had the bulged eyes, and you know, my student had seen some of that before, but this was a test, so I turned on the intensity and put all the stuff together. And you know, in a normal class, you don't get as much of that vicious eye look intensity part, but I wanted to see how he reacted and to give him that exposure of when he was already nervous, because, you know, you want to do well on your test. You know, he already was kind of walking that edge of being nervous. And now he saw what that looked like. And he told me afterwards, he's like, I'm really glad that this happened and that you showed me that, because now I've got a feel for what that will feel like when I'm already under tension. And, you know, I think it's an invaluable experience for any martial artist. If self-defense is part of what you want to do, this is not a luxury. It's a crucial component.
And absolutely. And unless you're dealing with a literal psychopath or a nutcase, someone who does not show emotion on their face, there's going to be a brief moment where you, as one human being to another, recognizes that they're about to go.
Right.
And you can see it in the shoulders.
That's the part that's really hard to simulate in a dojo.
Yeah.
that emotional
Yeah.
content. You can't, it's hard to simulate crazy or enraged, or you can kind of try, but it's going to be fake. You can always.
No, it's fake. Yeah. Yeah. It's really hard, but you can simulate focused attack. And that's for me, one of the most important fundamental things, because if you can react to that moment of focused intent, then you're already ahead of the fast hands.
And you've got the repertoire of understanding what, even though you understand the mindset now, you've seen the rage or you've seen the crazy or whatever it is, now you know what the body is. You know what the body can do. You know, you're used to seeing how is it going to come at me. By the way, I wanted to mention, because you put this really well, of your eyes look at that face that you want to hit. Like when you're angry, that's how it works. I know with trained fighters, you have to untrain that for when they want to hit a leg and they look down, their eyes will track to what they want to hit. And that's a telegraph. So you need to train that telegraph out of them to say, you got to be good enough at hitting the leg without looking down directly at it. You got to have that soft focus on your opponent's, clavicle area, and be able to hit the leg without telling them you're about to hit the leg. Because that's your natural instinct.
Yeah, it is. I mean, hardly anyone will do anything without focusing on it. I think the only example I've seen is, what's his name, the Super Bowl, Stafford. Just hurled a ball in a random direction.
Yeah.
That's not what happens in a fight. Beautiful to
watch.
That's
a highly disciplined fighter. And that's the other thing. I've seen highly disciplined fighters get into fist fights out of anger, and they don't look like a professional fighter anymore. They look like your average street ruffian, and brawler.
Yeah.
Like, what happened? You take a high level trained fighter and he throws everything he knew right out the window when he gets enraged.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, and it is. I've seen that so many times as well. I used to train with a couple of guys I trained with were in the Scottish karate team, and I saw one of them get attacked outside a nightclub back in the 90s, and he did everything he did in the dojo, but he did everything he did in the dojo.
Wasn't ready to adjust.
He didn't adjust to the fact that he was standing in front of someone who had 6 or 7 drinks down them. I don't know, he'd probably taken some form of barbiturate that night, I dare say, and was really quite upset, with him. So he didn't recognise the difference in threat. So he did great karate, and then the fella just poleaxed him with one punch. He hit the guy 3 times and kicked him in the head. But this fella just was not taking it. And that's
another thing you can't really simulate in a dojo is, what is it like to deal with a chemically altered individual?
No, you can't. No.
I mean, you can describe it. You can, if you want to try to role play it a little bit, you can kind of do it, but it's so fake. It's not going to be what it's going to be like when you actually.
Yeah, anyone who tells you that they train that way, without actually doing it is talking nonsense. It's. Yeah, and so we do have to understand the limits of our training in the dojo. We are training to simulate.
And by the way,
effects.
Neither of us are advocating getting a student on PCP so you can train against somebody who's chemically altered. Like, don't do it. Don't even think for a second.
Yeah,
that would be a good idea.
I know. I know. That would be the thing, isn't it? You set your student on a bad path. One night you come into the dojo and you just hear, "You were born in the darkness. I've lived in it, molded by it." You just turn one of your students into Bane just to see how well you can fight them. It's not going to happen. Oh, geez.
I remember, I think it was Richard Strauss's Heckler's book about In Search of the Warrior Spirit, when he was brought in, I guess, as a consultant to train some of these advanced military, kind of forces, in a small environment, about how do you mentally prepare for an engagement where you could lose your life. And he said, that's the paradox. How do you make training genuine enough without actually harming or killing the people that are training? That's an unsolvable training problem. And I know I did an episode a while back on the unsolvable training problem, which is, you can try to simulate, and this is kind of what Strauss Heckler got to, is you can segment and take different aspects that you can train safely, but what you can't do is put them all together into an exercise.
Yes. Yeah.
So you have to train those individual things, and then have your students or your soldiers understand you're going to have to put all these together when the time comes. Like that's how this is going to work, and the only way that it can work. Because I know a lot of martial artists like, we just need more reality. We need to get tougher. We need to, we got to bust each other up in practice. And it's like, no, that's not the responsible way to do it. And even the professionals, training professional military acknowledge, no, you cannot do that. And not even just shooting live rounds at each other, but like dealing with knives or whatever. It just, we have to accept that. And we can, rather than be frustrated by that limitation, recognize that it is what it is. And let's figure out the smartest ways of isolating those different categories of skills we need to develop. And in there, you touched on them, the hardening and toughening exercises, the stress inoculation, the actual physical technique part, which, you don't even need to do at full speed all the time. You should do slow, deliberate rolling work where you can focus on technique. Just isolate that one part so that when you start to bunch them together, you've done enough training to program the body to move correctly without you having to think about it, because your brain's going to be on something else. Your body's got to be ready to do it. And that's how it assembles those things. And
absolutely. It's got to be muscle memory. It has to be muscle memory, because in the heat of any situation, even competing, even in a competition, you don't have the luxury of thinking ahead. And that was something, again, that used to get drilled into us in the karate back in the day, was practice using preset movements, preset combinations. But when it comes right down to it, you have to lose those combinations and become freeform, because if those are only there to get you into the position of knowing what could follow on if the opportunity arises. That's why you didn't. It's why the individual who has, again, let's go back to boxing. Save a boxer who's got a great right hook, but everything else is weak. He's only going to be competent. That individual, or I shouldn't say he, that individual is only going to be competent if they find themselves in a position where they can employ that hook. Everything else beyond that has to be about positioning, controlling their opponent, getting the guard to drop, and getting them into a position where they can deploy that weapon. But if they have medium skill with everything else, rather than throwing all your attacks into one specific thing, and it's the same in Aikido. If you only practice, and we see I see a lot of clubs, and I train with a lot of people who clearly developed their big three, Iramanage, Shihonage, Kotegaeshi. But they don't do a lot of Tai no Henka as such. They don't do a lot of Tenshi-nage, which for me is one of the key fundamental techniques, Tenshi-nage. They don't do a lot of Kaiten-nage, so they're not used to taking weight on the kind of underside of the arms and drawing someone round them. So they lose balance when they spin. They're not used to having that control factor. We don't see a lot of the hip throws going in. And the ones we do tend to be more judo based, or more kind of compliant uke based, I should say, rather than a good judo grapple hip throw ogoshi style type thing. We don't see a lot of sutemi-waza and sacrifice work, quite rightly, but they're also useful because sutemi-waza puts you on the ground immediately, and if you can't get your throw in, you then have to counter it with something from the ground up. There's lots of techniques that we don't see. A lot of what we see is the big three: Iramanage, Shihonage, Kotegaeshi. And there's many, many more techniques that we didn't touch on there. But when we get back to this concept of fast hands, threat recognition, threat response, and moving your body as you see the intent to strike, the movement of Tenshi-nage and the movement of the hands is not just you moving in. It's similar to when we also do a face-off exercise with Bokken, and you have the tips of the Bokken touching, and the objective here is your partner's to come in and strike directly at your head, just in front of it. They're not trying to hit you. And you have to raise and move in before they get that chance. So like you were talking about the sensitivity thing, you have to feel where their Bokken starts to move against yours. And then as they rise, you have to move in. So you're both making shomanuchi simultaneously. Sure. And the objective of this isn't to be faster than your opponent. The objective of this is to be the same speed as your opponent. It's almost an awase movement. So that you get used to moving towards an attack, even if it's made with the Bokken. Because if you fail to move in, your opponent's going to be in perfect striking range when you don't move. And it's just getting people over that initial fear of moving in, moving in, moving in. And that concept of Tenchinage, when you move in with the hands in the movement of Tenchinage, or even just in Shomen, raising the bokken, you're actually bringing your hands into a position where you are able to defend yourself as you're moving. And it's important that we see the correlations between the weapons movement and the body movement. And I know that's something we briefly talked about the other night, is that there's getting this correlation. If your weapons training does not correlate to your hand techniques, then what you're doing is, all the weapons, what you're doing is just swinging a stick about. You might as well put on a Jedi robe and carry a lightsaber. It's that ridiculous. It's about that useful. But when you integrate your weapons movement into your body movement, when you're training with the weapon, you're training your body. You're not training with the sword. You're not training people to be samurai. You're training people to move their body with intent through the weapon. And that's an entirely different situation. So then you apply those same techniques and that same focus and intent through yourself when you undertake things like Tenchinage. And the movement in for Tenchinage, left hand down, right hand up, is exactly the same as you would do to block an incoming strike and drop an elbow under somebody's chin. It's the exact same motion there, exact same thing you're doing. So you've learned to defend the side of your head, just like we were talking about earlier from, what's his name? Jeff Thompson's book. You've learned to bring your hand down and drop your weight onto it to catch an incoming strike. More importantly, as you've picked up the intent and their arms are going back, you're moving in and you're shutting that distance down while dropping an elbow up under the chin. And you're shutting them down, which then gives you access to the soft muscle and the soft tissue under the throat with the elbow. It then gives you access to more direct attacks. It then gives you access to naked strangles, Hadaka Jime style things. It opens up your whole repertoire. But if you stood back and waited for that strike, you could never get into that position.
Mm. You know, you mentioned something just a bit ago about the remembering technique and having it have to be muscle memory. And I really like that one, because I've had a couple of students, you know, after class, they'll say, boy, I don't know how I'm going to remember all of this. You know, how am I going to keep this straight? And I said, you know, I'm not teaching your conscious brain. I'm teaching your body how to move. And if we do these movements well enough, long enough, that it will start to become ingrained, and you'll be amazed. You'll start seeing your body respond and doing these movements without you telling it what to do. You'll tell it when, like go, and then it will just go. And every one of them has come back and said, wow, I just felt that. I didn't choose to do, I didn't make a decision. I mean, my body just did it. It went. And like, well, that's what's going on here, is the level of training is not in the, not in the description. I will often describe, here's what we're going to do, so that I'm not, I try to give the student the most direct route to copy what I'm showing them. But really having it get internalized, that's where the learning really happens. And that's that muscle memory you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. We've all done that technique, the perfect technique. We've all done one. And someone comes in, we catch them, boom, they go flying away across the mat. And you're like, oh God, how did I do that? I don't know how I did that. And then you try and do it again, and you're like, you know, your grandmother with a broken leg, and you're falling over your own feet, and it all goes wrong. And it's like, you know, you feel like you're back on the Ike Zimmer frame and you've learned nothing. And you desperately want to recapture that single moment where everything went so well, the perfect ma'ai, the perfect ateme, the perfect technique, the perfect kuzushi, everything just worked. And then you spend the next 20 years trying to recapture that, and you're never going to get it again, because you're looking for it.
This to people, because I think everybody has felt this, where, you know, they out of the corner of their eye, they see it like an orange rolling off a table, and their hand just shoots out and they catch it.
Yeah.
Everybody's had an instance like that where their body just responds. It's not planned. They don't even see clearly where the hand's going, but it goes right where it needs to. Like, that's kind of what our training is trying to build, not an encyclopedic database knowledge in your forebrain of every technique, or, you know, yes, I think you want to build on the principles, but how they get expressed in those times of chaos where you just adapt to the things that are around you. You perceive what needs to be perceived, and you blend and execute just automatically. Like, that is the penultimate of what we're looking for.
What I love about that analogy as well, the rolling orange, is we react so naturally to grab it, and our hand just goes under it and we catch it. And yet, see if that was a crystal vase rolling across the table that's worth $3,000, you immediately go,
you turn into Jerry Lewis suddenly.
everything slows down, and you know you're not going to get it because you panic. And that brings us back to that panic mode where, because the orange is unimportant, we can just reach out and take it. But when it's something that carries weight, and I don't mean in terms of heaviness, I'm talking about something that carries weight or meaning or threat or danger, you know, or worth, that's when the panic kicks in. And that's the same thing that happens when we compete. It's why we're more likely to make a mistake in the finals of a competition than in the early days of the competition, because the stakes are rising. You know, the pot's getting bigger. Yeah. And we're then more likely to make the mistakes. And that's when it all kind of falls apart. And I think it's important as well that as martial artists, we maintain that attitude of not treating ourselves or the situation with lack of importance, but trying to maintain that level of importance. And that if we can apply just as much effort and training in the dojo for the stuff that doesn't seem to matter much, when it comes to having to apply it, we'll be in a much better position for applying the same level of unimportance, if that's the right word, or the same level of generality to the situation by being more comfortable and familiar with it. It's not the shock value that then we start moving in slow motion and everything turns to treacle and we don't react properly. That's really important. And that's where that threat level in the dojo works really well, because you don't get caught by surprise. You can move naturally. You know, you can keep your emotions under control. You can, obviously the threat level has increased. You know, the impact and the value of the outcome is going to increase, particularly if someone's threatening you physically. So it's, you know, the prize becomes much bigger. And likewise, the risks become much bigger. Therefore, it's keeping that under control and treating it as you would any other scenario. That's one of the things that I think is the best things about martial training, is it does to some extent, depending on how much you apply it, it does give you that capability to keep calm in the middle of the crisis and therefore react more naturally.
Sure. Well, wow, I just took a glance at the clock. We're about 90 minutes. So well, I'm sure we could keep going for another 2 hours, but let's, I think, wrap this one up. And do you have any kind of final thoughts you want to jump in with? I know this has been a great conversation as far as I'm concerned.
Just that no matter what we're doing and how we train, it's important just to understand the value of what you're training and to hold that. Every single session is truly a gift and a method of learning. If we can take that and apply it and not look at ourselves as try to turn ourselves into like ultimate fighters and warriors when it comes to this, just accept that what we're looking for here is a level of understanding of ourselves. If we know ourselves and know our weaknesses and are honest and open about facing them, then contacting our training partners to expose those weaknesses and go into them, whether it's doing more threat assessment training, whether it's doing more awareness training, whether it's just doing it yourself, walking down the street and saying, okay, that guy looks a bit threatening, that one doesn't. If I were caught in a situation here, how could I control my environment? Those little exercises that we can do that make us more capable and more adaptable, and then therefore give us additional tools, thought processes, and awareness when it comes to having to apply any of this, which I hope anyone listening to this never has to use their stuff. And I say that all the time. I pray to God, whatever your beliefs are, whatever your feelings are, you know, that you never have to use anything that you're training for. But at the end of the day, keep building on it. Look at every single aspect of life and nature as a learning experience, particularly with regards to how you can bring your training into that environment. That's one of the most important things we can do. And that takes away that initial fear and shock. But yeah, that's basically, I think that's one of the key aspects.
For those who are maybe interested, there's a couple of terms that are useful, and you can start to do a little bit more investigation on what Stephen's talking about. And they call it the terms either cold reading or profiling, where you talk about looking at somebody in just a few moments, split seconds even, assessing them and getting a handle on what their threat level likely is. And that can be reading their mood, their movements, their body language. All of that stuff is wrapped up into those terms, cold reading and profiling. I know that there's material on that out there. It's kind of difficult. There's not a lot of it. It's kind of difficult to get. really, and this is going to sound weird, but the best way to do it is just practice it. Look at somebody and a total stranger and say, what kind of mood are they in? What's going on in their head? Just spend a moment and try to look at the world kind of through their eyes, or kind of estimate what their body, their eyes are telling you, what their behavior is telling you. It'll tell you more than you think if you just take a few moments to watch it. And this is something that bouncers, door people, security people all do, and they're all good at, if they have had that type of been in that type of environment. You know, you can read the person a little distorted in the head, or they look pissed off, or they look, you know, it's subtle sometimes. Sometimes it's very blatant, but the practice will do a ton for you, even if you can't get a hold of a book or something that will walk you through it. And the thing about body language and cold reading and profiling books is they tend to be very focused on one thing, like how to read when your spouse is upset. They'll kind of focus it into a niche kind of world. So we're kind of usually looking at the self-defense niche, and there's a little bit of writing on it, but it tends to feel kind of vague. There's not like an ABC formula book that can tell you how to read when somebody's about to attack someone else. But it's a good study. So I just wanted to bring those up as to some ways for you to investigate if you're interested in knowing more, and just practicing it, because it's very enlightening. All right. Well, I think we're kind of.
I was just going to say, Tristan, please, everyone, don't blatantly stare at people in the street, or you will end up using your skills a lot more than you want to.
Yeah.
Be subtle.
This is true. You'll find the body language of staring is that of a challenge. That is like an animal eyeing up their prey, is when you stare, and it will frighten people, and you will get in trouble more than likely. So very good advice. Well, Stephen, thank you very much. This has been another great discussion. I always like chatting with you. I wish we were close. We could get together for a pint.
That'd be great. I'd love that.
That would be wonderful. So, all right, well, have a great rest of your day, and we will talk to you again very soon, my friend.
You too, Tristan. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this discussion. Stay tuned for more episodes. I've got some great stuff on the way very soon. In the meantime, enjoy your training.